Hi, welcome to the KHS Grad Student Life podcast. This is our second episode, and the focus of the podcast is to speak to graduate students in KHS about their experiences when they're done and finished and defended, but also talking to some of the grad students throughout their experience to kind of share and give insight of what it's like to be a grad student in KHS. So I'm Dr. Hoeber, and I'm going to be the host for today. And we're with Elise Melanson, who's a grad student almost going to be finished soon in the next couple months. So we're going to speak with Elise a little bit about her journey as well as a grad student, and then focus on the end about her experiences with the 3MT, which she just did about a month ago. All right. So we're going to start off first with a bit of an overview of, can you kind of explain what your research project was like for your master's, what the topic was, what did you do?
Yeah, so for my master's, I focused on the gendered culture of gyms and specifically how the prevalence of men and masculinities impacts that culture.
Okay. And can you give a bit of an overview? How did you collect your data? So this is getting into the specifics of it, but what did you do?
So I did primarily observations. So what that looks like is really just like being in the space and watching people behave, and participant observations specifically. So I was also just like becoming part of the space and getting to know the people and engaging in conversation and relationship as well.
And did you do anything else besides observations?
Yes, and then I did supplementary focus groups where I spoke specifically to members from the gym about kind of why they take part in the behaviors that they do or what their thoughts are about those behaviors that I did observe.
Okay, cool. I'm not going to explain. I'm just going to state I am Elise's supervisor, so we don't have to get into that part. But I want to go through a little bit about the journey, because I think sometimes research in general can look like it's a very linear process. It's written up that way, that it's like it all goes to plan. So can you maybe give some insight to kind of what your journey was like as a graduate student, and what might be were some of the challenges in doing this project?
In terms of like the beginning, I was fortunate because I had done an honors project that focused on women's experiences specifically. So going into my master's, I kind of knew what direction I wanted to go because I was already kind of familiar with the realm that I was going to go into and what needed to be looked at. But I knew I wanted to look at men and masculinity specifically, but I didn't know how I wanted to look at that, what that was going to look like, where I was going to do it. So I decided that I wanted to do observations specifically, and one of the main challenges was like finding a space that was open to me observing. So that was kind of probably the first big challenge that I faced. Reached out to many spaces before finding one that was open to it, and also had to like kind of pivot what that looked like to make it more comfortable for the space that I ended up in. So that was, the first challenge. Then also challenges with getting consent doing observations. So you typically have to get informed consent, usually like written. Yeah. And that's very difficult to do in a space where there's tons of people, and it's not very practical to like go and ask everybody to sign a piece of paper. So I had a little bit of challenges with that. But those are the only things that really come up that were kind of bumps in the road.
Yeah, well, I think there's always hiccups, and I think that's an important thing to realize, that generally this happens with all types of research, even once you're done being a grad student. And I think we don't talk about it very often, that I think maybe we feel like or internalize like, oh, it's not going well, but it's a reality, and it happens to everybody. So I think it's just important just to acknowledge like these things happen, and it can happen to other people in the future. So it's just nice to share a little bit of that, like, it is not linear. It's not always smooth. You have to get through these bumps to move forward. But there's a couple of things that you talked about that I would like to follow up with. Is one of them, so you were an honor student in KHS. What are your experiences like as a master's student in comparison to being an honor student? Do you have any sense of how they're different, or what things have changed or evolved in that time?
Well, first I'd say just like I want to emphasize how helpful it was to do the honors before the master's. Like coming in, I feel like I had a much better understanding of research and what it looks like, because I did kind of like a mini version of a master's. So it was helpful in that way. In terms of their differences, the master's is a lot more involved. So the project was more extensive and I had more time to get into it, and was expected to get a little bit deeper with like the theory and those kind of elements. So I would definitely encourage anyone who's interested in research to try the honors, and that kind of gives you a really good idea of if you want to go to the master's, and then sets you up nicely if you do.
And how long is an honors? Just so that other people know, like how many terms is it, or how many months does it take?
If I'm remembering correctly, I think it's 2 terms. Yeah, 1 term to do the proposal and kind of set it up, and then the second term is to actually do the research and the analysis and write up.
So it's about 8 months in total. And again, the expectations are lower. It is a starting point, but it does gives you your toes wet a little bit about what to expect for that. So the second thing I want to follow up with, because you did observations, and while historically observations were very common for qualitative researchers, we don't see it as often. So I just want you to elaborate a little bit about, like, what did you learn about doing observations, and again, maybe some of the things that you really like doing about observations, but also, again, maybe some of the challenges or difficulties.
There's different kinds of observations, and I did participant observation, which meant that I was a participant in the space. So I wasn't like sitting as like a third party, like watching people. I was watching people, but I was also like working out and like developing relationships. And so that had like positives and negatives, right? So, positives is that I got like a really good understanding of the culture of the space. I'm part of the culture of the space. Another just like little plus is that it's hard to fit in a workout when you're a grad student. And if I'm in the gym all the time, it's like easy to work out.
It's a win-win.
But then there was like some harder challenges, like when you become part of the community that you're researching, there's a lot of like different moral and ethical dilemmas that come up. And so facing kind of like some of those elements made it a little bit more challenging, because I wasn't just there as a researcher. I was like also very much there as me, myself. So, because it's not possible to develop those relationships without being like authentically yourself outside of that identity of researcher. So yeah, some little challenges came up with that, but.
Okay. So again, I think doing observations sounds like it's very simple. Do we do observations every day? But do you have some tips for someone? Like if you were to tell a grad student, I'm doing observations, what would you tell them you need to work on? Or these are some skills that make a good observer?
The idea of observing, I think at first, when you first think of it, you're like, okay, that's like pretty straightforward. But then you think like, what are you watching for? And you could watch for anything and you could write down everything you possibly see.
Or hear.
Or experience. Anything. So starting with like some kind of guide, but having it be a very loose guide, open to seeing new things. So like for myself, I took some theory that I was familiar with prior, and I used that as a guide, but I also allowed myself to go beyond that too. And then really just coming back to my research questions to make sure that I wasn't getting too far off track, because you start paying attention to certain things, and then before you know it, you could be like writing down every time somebody, I don't know, like does something that actually doesn't even answer your research question, and then you're like stuck kind of writing the whole time you're up there and not really engaging because you're so focused on everything that you're observing.
I agree, and I think it is one of the biggest challenges is that once you actually really start observing, you realize how much data there is, what you hear, what you see, what you smell, language, conversations, movement patterns, structures, and it's overwhelming. It is absolutely overwhelming. But then you realize how many things could potentially be interesting. So you're right. I think having parameters to start off with makes it much more doable, takes some of the pressure off. But I think it's also important, as you just said, to have that openness as well too. It's kind of like that idea of serendipity of like, you don't always know what's going to be meaningful, but you can't collect everything. Like that's just not possible. be very difficult.
Yeah, you have to accept that you can't collect everything. Because when you're up there, you're like, I need to be paying attention to everything because I need to make sure that if something interesting happens that pertains to my research question, that I'm getting it down. But that's just not possible to do that and to build relationships and like be in the space and actually engaging with people. So.
And then someone to look normal, like to be part of it. So yeah, it's, again, I think it's a very interesting one to do, but it's more challenging than I think we think it should take. I want to go into maybe a little bit of, again, you're almost at the end. If you were to do it again, would you do anything different?
That's a good question. Nothing comes to mind specifically that I would do differently. Yeah. But like I said, I was really open to like things changing throughout, and things did change throughout. And so as things needed to change, I was open to them changing. So there was a plan maybe at the beginning that shifted as I went through and figured out, what was actually possible. And so that kind of not forced me, but led me to doing it in a way that I was, very happy with. Yeah. There's nothing like specifically that comes to mind. I mean, initially I wanted to have focus groups and conversations with more demographics of people. But then the limitations of the time and the space and those kinds of things obviously limits what I can do.
But I think that idea too, what you were talking about of that shifting and the moving is also it's a good insight about what qualitative research can be. And that idea that we start off with somewhat of a plan, somewhat of an idea, but I think being open to kind of moving with where it's going to go, which is difficult because it means it's not always in your control. But I think it also makes it more authentic of what can actually come out of it. So again, I'm glad you shared that because we don't always talk about that as well too. And that seems very scary when you don't know where it's going to go. But I think having that openness allows you to kind of expand what the potential is of your project. Before I get into a little bit of advice, and then we're going to get into the 3MT, what would be some takeaways from your project that you would like to share with practitioners or other groups that might work out in the gym? Kind of what can people learn from it?
I think the biggest thing that I'd like just for people entering the gym in general is just having an understanding that different people are entering the gym with a different experiences, and that limits how comfortable they are and how they're able to move through the space and how freely they can do that. I think especially if you're somebody that goes to the gym a lot and are very comfortable with it, you kind of forget how daunting of a space it can be. And so I think for the people that do go to the gym, just trying to be as like welcoming and open and conscious of how your behaviors are maybe making the space more difficult for other people to enter. And then for those who haven't entered the gym or are a little scared to, just empowering them that they deserve to take up space, and that just because maybe they don't see as many people that look like them or they're not as comfortable doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be there.
And I think maybe I should clarify that a lot of this, maybe not exclusively, but focuses more on the strength-based areas of gyms. You didn't really focus on the cardio part, but that part. So if you had the chance, to redesign the strength-based part, would you do anything different? To make it more welcoming, as you said, to newcomers, to people that maybe don't fit the norm or the stereotype of who works out in the strength-based areas, like any design or any kind of, I don't know, sound or...
There's certainly like elements of the space that I think could change to make it more welcoming. Like a few things that just come to mind is like there's so many mirrors which are there for a purpose, for form and whatnot, but with the mirrors comes a very heightened awareness of the fact that you are being potentially watched, that you are watching yourself and maybe judging yourself or being more self-conscious. So maybe just like more consciousness about where those are placed and not just like widespread placing them everywhere. And then more awareness of like cell phones and the way that you're directing them, so that just being considerate that if you are filming your set, there might be somebody behind you that is not comfortable with that, and then now they're more aware of that they're being watched through a cell phone and they don't know what's happening with that. I think this is kind of in a dream world because this is harder, but like some gym spaces, strength-based areas are very congested. Like the equipment is very close together,
Yeah.
and that can make a lot of people uncomfortable as well. And then this isn't logistically very sound, but there is like a very definitive separation gender-wise in the strength-based area and in the cardiovascular area. And because they're so definitively separated, it's kind of hard for people to, especially women, to come into the strength-based areas. They're usually more comfortable in the cardiovascular areas. And so if those equipment could be, you know, I don't know, intermingling in some way, but at the same time, I mean, I understand how they're organized in the way that they are. Yeah. But I think that more than just like the physical space is just being considerate of how difficult it is to move through the space. So like, for example, I think people that organize gyms and go to gyms think it's so easy to just come up to the desk and like scan a card and come through. But people that aren't comfortable don't even really know. They don't know how to get a card. They don't know how to scan through. They don't know once they get in there, where are they supposed to put their stuff? Where are the water fountains? Where are they supposed to warm up? Like they aren't oriented to the space at all. So I think just being like conscious that it is intimidating and that maybe we should be conscious of making it like more, just being conscious that people aren't as comfortable entering the space and make it more obvious kind of what the expectations are when you get in there.
And I think part of it too is that there's a lot of social norms that are there, like, you know, how do you claim a piece of equipment? Where do you put your stuff? And maybe there could be more perhaps education of kind of what the norms are to make sure that people feel more comfortable, that they do belong, they are part of it. But you're right, the space, the congestion, the mirrors can really heighten the self-awareness and the self-consciousness for some people that would be really uncomfortable. And again, I know you talked about women, but it could also be people with a disability, people perhaps that are visibly different than someone else. It really makes them more self-conscious of themselves. So again, there could be a time where they look very different. So hopefully this contributes to that. A couple questions of advice before we get into the 3MT. What advice would you give you entering into grad school? Like if you were to go back to you starting off in grad school, what would you tell yourself?
I would remind myself that it's like more of a marathon than a sprint. Because I like committing to a lot of things, and a lot of like really great opportunities come to you when you're in grad school. And so I'm somebody that likes to say yes to new experiences. So then every experience that comes my way, I want to say yes. And so there's a few times that I found myself not having much of like a work-life balance, or not able to focus on my actual research as much as I would like to, because I was focusing on other projects or things that I had gotten involved in. So I just remind myself that I need to take personal time for myself in order to be able to sustain what I'm doing for multiple years.
Right. Yeah. So I think maybe one thing I'm going to follow up with you about it is that is the idea about opportunities, which I know can be a distraction, absolutely. But can you highlight what are some of the opportunities for grad students getting into grad school beyond just being a grad student? What else do you get to do or could do?
Well, I've joined like several different like boards and clubs and that kind of thing, and made like a lot of pretty tangible change in the faculty and in the university, the larger university. But on top of that, like work opportunities in like officer administration settings, I've had that. Teaching opportunities as a teaching assistant or a teaching fellow. Research opportunities maybe outside of your direct topic. So working as like a research assistant. And that's just like a few things I can like tangibly name, but I feel like there's always opportunities kind of coming my way of things that either I'm super excited about and have been wanting to do, or that I haven't even thought about. But then when I hear about it, I'm like, oh, that sounds awesome. I'd love to try that.
So it's nice to sort of know that there are opportunities for grad students to get involved in lots of different parts of the functioning of the institution. So whether it is like working on campus, helping out other researchers, teaching, TAing, as you said, sitting on committees or boards. So again, that's sort of a double-edged sword. It's great that they exist, and I think they're really great opportunities to learn, develop new skills, networking, but also be careful because it can be a lot. There can be a lot of opportunities and sometimes can take you away from what you're really here for. So I want to encourage people to do it, but also with it's okay to say no. You don't have to do everything. Maybe a little bit of what advice would you give just in general to other like new grad students coming in about what it's like to be a grad student or maybe to do research like you have? So it could be either just in general, what advice would you give to other grad students or someone who might do something similar to you?
I mean, I think in general, I would say like to develop a support system within the university, like build a sense of community with the other grad students and the people around you, because it can be, like I said, like the work-life balance element can be challenging. It's a very self-directed program. So if you don't develop those relationships in that community, then you can sometimes feel like you're on your own. So the first thing that comes to mind is just, develop relationships with people that are also in your graduate program. In terms of people doing a project similar to mine, what would I say? I think I have lots of thoughts, but like I'm trying to think of what kind of tangibly I can talk on.
Whether it's about the methodology or the idea about looking at people's experiences in gyms, like where do you think this research could go? Maybe we'll switch it that way. Maybe I'll prompt you even further. Is there some way of like maybe making it more intersectional, of looking at multiple different experiences in there?
Yeah, well, like I said before, like when I initially started this, I wanted to look at gender at a much broader scale. And I also wanted to look at intersectionalities, and that just wasn't an option with the time and the resources that I had. So anyone who wants to do a topic similar to mine, there is so many avenues to look at in terms of the culture of gyms and how they're less accessible for certain people. And I mean, if you went to a gym, it's pretty straightforward what kinds of demographics maybe would need that support or their stories told. So I think that's one element. Yeah.
But I do think, recognizing how much benefit there is in going to a gym, and in particular strength-based exercises for all ranges of people and all different ages and things like that. But you're right, it's not always a comfortable place. But I think acknowledging, hearing more stories about how do we get, non-binary, how do we get someone with a disability, someone from low income to go into a gym who may not have the right clothes or the right shoes, that sort of just recognize, we know there's a lot of good health benefits and personal benefits, but recognizing, and we might say they're open and accessible, experience says it's not. So I think there's so much more room. We can go further with that.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. Okay, I want to turn into the 3MT. So the 3MT is a 3-minute thesis. It's a competition that's sort of regional, starts at the institution, then goes regionally and nationally. The whole focus is for students to be able to explain in 3 minutes their thesis. So can you give me a bit of background? Why did you want to do it? And what were some of your experiences in doing and competing in the 3MT?
Yeah, okay. So why I wanted to do it, I was fortunate last year to be at the conference where they had the national finals. And so I didn't know, like I knew of 3MT, but I hadn't really watched any. And seeing obviously the best in Canada, it was like quite a inspiring introduction to it. And so I even got to see like Michael Mensa from the U of R, he won. And so seeing him especially up there, able to communicate his research in such like a clear way to a non-academic audience was like really inspiring. And I am very passionate about the idea of like being able to explain my findings to people that aren't in academia, because I think that there is such a gap there between the people doing the research and the people that are like actually impacted. So when I saw how powerful it could be to practice that, I saw the 3MT and I was like, okay, that's a great opportunity to like get me to start practicing and honing that skill. So that's kind of what inspired me to get into it. And then the second question
what was your experience? So I'm just going to say you finished third at the institutional level. So again, congratulations for that. That's very exciting. But what was it like doing it? Because you're right, trying to explain to a lay audience, but also in 3 minutes is a challenge. So what did you, again, learn? What were some techniques that helped you with that, about trying to get it down into 3 minutes and explaining it to a lay audience?
Yeah, it was very difficult.
Yeah.
But a really good learning experience. And I think like the biggest thing I took away from it was accepting that you can't tell it all.
Yeah.
And you also can't represent it in the way that you're used to representing it to an academic audience. So a lot of people doing the 3MT, they use like analogies and that kind of thing. And so I kind of took that route in a way, but basically I looked at the kind of theoretical framework I was coming from and tried to find an element of that I could just focus specifically on that and be able to explain it reasonably well in 3 minutes, and then use that to explain the rest of my findings.
Yeah. So what was the analogy that you used?
Yeah. So I used Foucault's application of the panopticon prison design as a means to explain how people self-police their social behaviors. So the design itself is involves like cells arranged along peripheral buildings facing a central tower. And so there's a guard that may or may not be in that tower, and the inmates can't see totally to know if they are there. And so as a result, the inmates start to become their own guard because they don't know if they're being watched or not. And so the idea with that in gyms is that we kind of become our own personal guards because we fear this potential of being watched or judged from other people. And so what I ended up getting to and focusing on in that presentation was how women experience that sense of their personal guard even more so, because they're being watched more, because there's a prevalence of men watching and giving women attention that they maybe don't want. And then also just like the elements that are not gendered, like the mirrors and the phones and the general people watching that goes on.
Yeah. So there's a lot of other activities that really heighten that, because you don't know when you look in a mirror, is someone just looking at themselves, or are they looking at other things? Same thing with the phone. Are they just filming themselves, or are they filming other people? So there's so many elements, and it is part of the culture, maybe unfortunately, but of the gyms that we have some of those things. So if someone else was going to do the 3MT, what kind of advice would you give to them besides trying it?
Yeah, I would say, give yourself more time to prepare it than you think you'll need, because 3 minutes sounds so short. It's like I could put together 3 minutes of talking, like easy, but to actually like narrow down what element of it you want to focus on took me like a very long time. And then just getting out of your comfort zone to be more engaging, it can be a challenge for a lot of people. So part of the kind of judging criteria is engagement, audience engagement.
Yeah.
And in order to do that well, you have to be very like excited and almost theatrical with your presentation, which is different than how we usually approach things in academia. So I think just like allowing yourself to be uncomfortable and kind of similar to people in a gym, take up space on that stage, feel like free in your movement, because that's what's going to be engaging to the audience.
Well, that's really good. And I think also just that understanding that it is very difficult to do things that you're right. It's like saying to a first year student, oh, you only have to do a 3-minute presentation. That seems easy, but when it has to be polished and engaging and very clear and concise, it's incredibly difficult to actually do that. But then also realizing it is a performance. It's not just standing up there and being very emotionalist, that it takes a lot of energy to actually do that. But those are exciting things to learn about how to do this, because we do it in classrooms and we do it elsewhere. So that's kind of cool to take away from that. That was the last question that I had. So was there anything else that maybe you want to share about your experiences as a grad student that maybe other people would find interesting?
I think something that I've really honed in is like how I approach getting work done, because as I said before, it's like a very individualized program. So you have to motivate yourself to do a lot of your work. And part of that for me was like finding the space and the time where I do that best. And so I'm like very passionate about like setting up spaces that inspire you. So like my workspaces are set up in a way that I genuinely enjoy, visually and also just like physically comfortable. And so I think throughout the program, I've like honed that in so that when I go to my desk, either at home or here at the university, it's like a space that it's like a sacred, special space where I go to and I focus on my thesis and in turn like focus on myself. And so I think even if like you don't have the physical space of a desk, even if you're going to the library, like setting that space up in a way that will set you up for a good experience and like motivates you to do that work.
Yeah, so that might be facing a window. Maybe that's having headphones on, and you've got whether it's quiet or music. And again, I think for me, like in my office, I'm very visual. I like having lots of things to look at that makes me feel comfortable in that space. So I think that's a really good piece of advice, is to set up a place that you're going to be successful because you want to be there, you like it there, as opposed to it's a place like you hate it, you dread it. It's not going to help. You're not going to want to go, and it's going to be very difficult. So I think there's also that sense of it can be small things. It doesn't have to be entirely redecorating, but that makes it very comfortable. Yeah,
I like
that.
With like the procrastination element too, because then it's like I have these spaces or this like pseudo space that I set up myself that when this is set up, I'm working, right?
Yeah,
because it's so hard to motivate yourself to like get going a lot, but once you start going, it can be quite easy to get things done.
I'm just going to say, I think the last piece about that is really important for grad school, is that it's so different than undergrad, because the first part's structured with classes and then it's not. And as you said, it's self-motivated, it's independent, which in some ways sound very lovely, very exciting. But when you're in it, it's very easy to procrastinate, to think about something else, to not have to do it because you've got nothing that you really have to be accountable to. So you kind of have to do that to make sure you're moving forward. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.
All right.